Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we are back with Carleton University's Dr. Jennifer Robson to talk about Chrystia Freeland's big speech on what the government is doing to help Canadians deal with inflation. The gist of it is that she largely re-announced or somewhat explained what the government is already doing. She didn't make any new promises, but Jennifer had a really interesting thread on Twitter the other day that kind of broke down what the promises, not the promises, the programs were. And I figured I'd get her to walk us through that. Jennifer.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back.
Well, glad to be here. That was an interesting speech from the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister in the sense that I think, like some other people, when I was reading the media reports of the leaks, I thought, oh, she's announcing like new spending. This was not new spending at all. This was actually essentially announcements from 2021 from that budget finally actually getting out the door.
Okay.
And she had kind of I would say it was a two-track message. On the one hand, recognizing inflation has been painful, right? And is going to continue to be painful for a lot of Canadians, and sort of saying, expressing this clear sense that this is the role for the Bank of Canada, for the central bank to be singularly focused on fighting that. And then indicating that the federal government, like when you read the text of the speech, it became clear the federal government is not going to be doing a whole lot of new spending that would potentially work against what the what the central bank is trying to achieve here, right? Because you want these two things to be working together. But she also left this open, sort of like, but we're prepared to do more if we need to. Anyway, but I'm happy to maybe walk through. She basically said, look, we have a package of tools that we're using. These are not new tools. These are old tools. They are longstanding tools. But I think she tried to bring the audience along in terms of saying the federal government is going to be using the tools that it already has in the toolbox, and here are the ways that this will be helping Canadians weather this storm. So I don't know. Do you want me to? Should we walk through what she?
Yeah, for sure. Let's get a sense of what she thinks is important for people to know.
Yeah. So, okay. She listed, I think it was about 5, 6, maybe even 7 different kinds of initiatives the federal government has underway. Some of them are kind of like, they're getting to be sort of like the greatest hits. Like we keep hearing these over and over again, right? Like, yes.
The Abba Gold of political messaging.
Yeah. Yes, we understand this government has made historic and important commitments in terms of building out a system of early learning and childcare. Yes, we know that. Yes, we know that for some families with very young kids, this will eventually, not in the short term, eventually this will make a meaningful difference in terms of affordability, right?
I think in some provinces they've already had a 50% reduction, but
for those families who are already getting the spaces, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those families benefit, and that's important, right? Like, let's not lose sight of that. But in terms of that, like, broader relief for more families, that, that's going to take time to get to. But okay, so we had that one, right?
We had that one.
Then she also mentioned again in passing sort of another issue around affordability, namely dental care. Right.
Yes, so which was the subject of our previous video together.
Exactly.
And they still haven't decided on a frame of how that's going to work either. So,
and the clock's ticking now, right? Because they've said that it's got to be a part of their deal with the NDP is that this has to be rolling.
The first part needs to be by the end of this year. So
yeah. So we'll see. Wait and see. So if you basically take those two things, and then I'm going to turn to the other programs in a moment. But if you take those two things, this is more about the role of government in eliminating some out-of-pocket expenses by essentially doing, public investments,
Yeah.
Right. So you're not having to pay out of pocket to go see the dentist because there's a program that makes it available to you. I think one of the challenges is that some economists look at this and they go, wow, this is big spending, right? And this could be, especially once you add in these other standing transfer programs to households, this could be raising aggregate demand overall, which could be counter to what the central bank is trying to do. I guess I'm a little bit more sanguine because when you look at the effects of ELCC, right, we know that this is actually going to be anti-inflationary in terms of actually promoting greater labor market participation, and it's pro-growth and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So do you want to cut this investment now because of current inflation and then essentially like cut off your nose to spite yourself over the longer term?
Yeah.
On dental care, I don't look, we had that whole great long conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you about that. So I'm waiting to see how that's all going to roll out. But my sense is that low-income families who save on dental care, what it's doing is meaning that their kids can actually get dental care as opposed to just foregoing the service, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like they're going to go out and buy like big screen TVs because they got access to dental care, right? They don't do that kind of substitution.
Yeah.
But then we have these transfer programs that she talked about. One of them, so Canada Workers Benefit, this has actually been around for a long time, goes to very low income, very low wage workers as a bit of a like top up, right? So it's meant to reward work, but it works on a past year basis. Like in other words, you work in 1 year, you file your taxes, then you get the benefit next year. So any money that is going to be going out the door as of, let's call it the benefit year. So we think about a tax year being, it's the same as the calendar year, right? You work in 1 year, you file taxes, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The benefit year actually works on a 6-month, they're off cycle. So it actually starts in July and runs to July, runs to June.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and that's for like also GST credits and all that kind of stuff.
Credits, frankly, old age security and other seniors benefits, child benefits. So basically all of it works on this basis of we take the time as a federal government to get your tax return, assess your income. We give ourselves a bit of time to do all of the back and forth reconciliation. And then in July, we adjust what you're going to get. So there's some of these programs that are adjusting because of changes to the rules or the parameters. So Canada Workers Benefit is one. They're making some changes to expand eligibility to some more low wage workers. The problem there was basically twofold. Over time, particularly provincial minimum wage laws had been increasing minimum wage. And the principle of the Canada Workers Benefit was supposed to be like, look, if you're making minimum wage, even if you're working full time, you should be eligible for this because you're not comfortable, right? Like that's a minimum wage, right? And so those thresholds had raised, but the Canada Workers Benefit hadn't really kept pace. So that's what they're doing. This is still a benefit that tops out if you're a single person at $1,400 a year, right? Yeah. And if you're in a if you're a parent or if you have a spouse, then it still only tops out at $2,400. So that the maximum amount is not changing, right? And when the federal government says 1 million more workers will now get access to the benefit as a result of our policy change, remember they're counting people who get $1, right? Yeah. So a lot of this workers' benefit can actually be quite small amounts. And this was all stuff that was announced last year. Another benefit that they're changing is old age security. So this is like the universal seniors benefit. Well, almost universal. Like there's a residency requirement. Anyway. Yeah. But what they're doing is finally making good on something that they actually promised to do back in 2019, which is to boost the value by 10%. For older seniors, namely those 75
people over age 75, which ever since 2019, the Bloc has been incensed about.
Oh, I didn't realize that. What?
This has been one of their biggest bugaboos outside of official languages laws, because they're insisting it created 2 classes of seniors, and all seniors deserve this top up.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I would have to think more on sort of like what's the politics behind why they're taking that position.
Yeah.
I think the challenge here is that this is big money, right? Like it's we are an aging population. And yes, it is true that there are some seniors who are facing essentially longevity risk, right? Like they had retirement savings. They didn't expect to necessarily live as long as they're ending up living, right?
Yeah. And the
So,
government's line tends to be, there are some, it can be more expensive the older you get, has been one of the sort of lines that they kind of trot out here and there. So, and that people have run out of savings. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Look, I think there are dueling narratives on this, and there's sort of evidence a bit of both ways. On the one hand, by the time you hit your senior years, like you've bought all the fridges and the cars and the whatevers that you're probably going to buy in your lifetime, right? In terms of big consumer
Yeah.
durables that are like big ticket items. On the other hand, yeah, you have some new costs that you're facing in terms of probably extra medical costs, adaptive and assistive devices, maybe some additional services that you need to be able to, live comfortably and with dignity, ideally. That's what we should want for all seniors. I guess my concern with this particular benefit, I'm going to go in the polar opposite of the block. The seniors I worry about more are the ones who are eligible for the low income top up to the OAS, right? Which is called the Guaranteed Income Supplement.
Yes.
It's a smaller group. They tend to be disproportionately women. And they're the ones that they basically will be very unlikely to have other retirement resources. And I personally would have preferred to see this money more targeted to those seniors in greater need. So I don't discount the possibility that this is actually one area of spending that could be a little inflationary. But on the other hand, given what we know about how seniors spend their money, like I said, they've kind of already bought the cars and the fridges and the microwaves and all the rest of it. So they're not really going to be competing with other Canadians and bidding up the prices for a lot of those goods, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the things that are driving inflation. And they're less likely to be driving, so fuel, all that sort of stuff. So there's that. And then last but not least, there's this group of benefits that the Deputy Prime Minister pointed to and said, hey, we are adjusting these for inflation. This is not news. This is just how these benefits work. They are indexed. And if we didn't index them, they would be fundamentally worth a lot less.
Yeah.
And those are the ones we talked about, like the GST credit, the child benefits. So yes, the workers' benefit is also inflation adjusted, but they're actually only inflation adjusted once a year. Seniors benefits are interesting. They adjust 4 times a year. So in the last year, seniors, this is true for Canada Pension Plan, this is true for that OAS GIS benefit as well. Seniors have actually had some advantages in terms of seeing their benefit rates do more to keep up with the spike in inflation in this last year. So last July, inflation was running at about 3.5%, roughly.
Yeah. That rings a bell.
And now we're nudging 7, right?
Yeah.
So
and we'll find out this week if we top it.
Yeah, we'll find out, right? Has the pace of this slowed or not? Anyway, so all of that to say, yes, these benefits will, as of July, the first check's going out July 15, these benefits will be bigger than they were in June this month. But that's just to try and keep up with inflation. So this is not new money. Now, the one thing I thought that was a little bit, got my eyebrows up was that the Deputy Prime Minister in her speech said, this was prudent. We had concerns and we planned ahead. I'm probably being a bit more direct than she was in her speech, but the implication was like, we knew inflation could be a risk. And that's why we made sure that these tools were ready and in place for helping Canadians weather the storm, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Like this also feels a bit of like political theater in that really in budget 2021, you were thinking ahead, gosh, it's going to take us a really long time to roll these changes out the door because it takes a long time before you have a new benefit year and to adjust all the formulas within programs that CRA and ESDC run. gosh, we better start now in case inflation is double what it is today. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
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 So
shades of Emperor Palpatine insisting that he's foreseen everything.
Oh my goodness. I don't know that I would go so far as to compare Chrystia to Palpatine.
No, just in terms of, yeah. Oh, I totally saw this coming.
Oh, sure. Yes. I don't know.
I've foreseen this.
I feel like I feel maybe more like a Jedi and saying like, I don't know, the dark side is clouding everything. It's difficult to see. Yeah. So I like I'm not a forecaster. I don't really know where this is all headed, but I think some of this concern, right, about the timing of this spending is about, frankly, this disconnect between how quickly economic conditions can change, but outside of kind of massive emergencies where the government just sort of goes like shovel money out the door, how slow an awful lot of our transfer programs are to adjust.
Yeah.
Right? Like these are plotting programs. They are not, they're not speedy.
Yes. And there is a certain overestimation about the capacity for which, how fast things go in government. And we saw that a lot with CERB and, people saying just send checks to everyone. It's like, no, that'll actually take even longer.
First of all, we have to find everyone. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And we have to put their name on a check. We have to know where to send it to. Yeah. Like it's, don't like, I just keep thinking people need to stop kidding themselves that, government is not that organized. They're not like, they don't have this perfect information on you. If anything, it's not uncommon to find a government computer running on like, Windows XP or something,
Yeah.
So there's an IT problem, there's an informational problem, and part of this is actually it's good, right? Like there's an effort to get it right, to avoid making mistakes, to like in the States, they did rush. They just sent checks out the door, and a lot of those checks ended up going to people who were deceased, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, people were alive, and I think are still trying to find their check because it didn't make it to them, right?
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate that for our circumstances, there's an effort and an emphasis on getting it right, making sure that the people who are entitled to the money get the money. But there is this trade-off that these are not always timely, right? Like I'm trying to think of a single instance where a government announced a policy change to something like child benefits or a GST credit or something like that in a spring budget. And I'm, other than sort of like a one-time top off, like, like we're doing this one time once, we're going to boost this, but where they announced like significant changes to the parameters or something like that. And that it was ready to rock and roll for implementation in the July. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think it's a bit wild that we have to just kind of remember that the speed of the back end of government is not what we assume it to be.
No, it isn't. Now, look, I mean, I tried to make the pitch that actually in the same way that seniors benefits already have that automatic indexing on a quarterly basis so that they do adjust in closer to real time. So when prices go up, they adjust for that, they account for that. I've tried to make a pitch for expanding that to some of the other benefits that touch more working age folks and of course families with kids. So again, child benefits, and GST credits, and kind of workers benefit and all that. I haven't so far won that debate, but I hope somebody inside government is listening.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just on that note, they did change the carbon rebates for the provinces that get it to quarterly this year. So do we think that will have the same kind of reaction to the adjustment? Because fuel prices mean that the carbon prices will be higher?
That's a great question. I actually do not know enough about the guts of that program to be able to say. So my first take when I heard that announcement was, oh, they're just changing the frequency of the payment, they'll do it, in the same way as they do the GST credit, that you get this quarterly. Um, I just figured it was that. So I would be very interested. I'll have to dig into it to find out if that also means that they are adjusting the payment value. I suspect not. But
yeah. That'd be interesting to know.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess my last question is, the NDP's pitch has been enrich the GST credit, enrich the Canada Child Benefit. But I have to wonder if the government's thinking is, if they did that, it would create more inflationary pressure, because you're putting more money into a market where the Bank of Canada is trying to suck some of the air out of it.
Right.
And I just wonder if I'm reading that correctly, or if I'm missing something here.
No, I don't think you're reading it incorrectly in terms of some of what the government is likely saying in terms of their internal conversations on this. I would actually differentiate, though, between those two credits, the GST credit and the Canada Child Benefit. So remember, the Canada Child Benefit, I mean, it's like quasi-universal. Like if you have a kid under 18, you have a 99% chance, if you file your taxes, which is another big issue. But anyways, can have a whole other conversation on that. But if you file your taxes, you have about a 99% chance of qualifying for at least something in that program. Like it reaches way up the income scale for families, like well into over $200,000 now, right? And that's getting into an income range where families have a certain amount of disposable income. Those are also the families who, during the pandemic, were more likely, right? So the upper middle and upper income households were vastly more likely to accumulate a lot of that, like basically surplus, because they weren't
traveling and buying new cars.
All that's right.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the money that is still sloshing around out there that needs to work its way through the system, although supply is still highly constrained.
Yeah.
So I worry a little bit that if we did a blanket boost to the CCB, then you could be fueling some of that consumption, right? In previous recessions, the Department of Finance has put out a position that essentially child benefits have been stimulus, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't kind of have it both ways. You can't say, no, this wouldn't be stimulus in this case, right? If there had been a mechanism to be able to target the child benefit boost to the very lowest income families, then I would be a lot less concerned. And that's also why I sort of look at the GST credit a little bit differently, because it's highly uncontested, right? And it goes to people who are very low income, who don't have slack, who are less likely to have built up so-called surplus savings in the last couple of years. These are people who, when prices rise, they eat less and sometimes go hungry, right? Or they fall behind on rent. These are not people who, when prices rise and you boost their income, will now be competing with you for the price of, I don't know, lychee or whatever at the grocery store, right? Like this is, And they're also households who are, all else being equal, a little less likely to be carrying consumer debt in the form of mortgages and credit card payments. Low-income Canadians tend to be more debt averse. So they're getting the pain of inflation in terms of rising prices, but the bank's tool of raising policy rates is not necessarily aimed at them, right? Yeah. It's aimed at people like you and I, right? Who, like, we're exposed in terms of interest rates, and we have to now make some choices around how do we spend or not spend our disposable income as is reasonable. But I don't think anybody has ever made the case, or would, frankly, ethically make the case that fighting inflation means that low-income families shouldn't eat. That's never. I don't think that's ever been the bank's intention, right? So we have this challenge of these instruments that are kind of like big hammers, and at the same time, the actual distribution of the prices and the debts and all the rest of it that you're trying to influence out in the market are spread unevenly. So yeah. So I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess the NDP isn't wrong to be worried about low-income people, but think about instrument choice on that one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for walking us through this. I
pleasure.
feel a lot more, I guess, enlightened in terms of how to differentiate some of these things. And we'll do this again.
Great.
All
Okay.
right. Thanks.
Okay.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at Journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.